As a footnote, this is the article. It was published in Language Journal by sociologists, and it is the most cited article in all of the history of language.
Como nota al margen, este artículo fue publicado en Journal Language y fue escrito por sociólogo, pero es el más citado en la historia de ese proyecto.
Not only the most cited, but almost 3 times as much as Chomsky's most cited.
El más citado, casi 3 veces más citado que el más citado de Chomsky.
Yeah. And what's been happening is that the influence has been growing.
Lo que sucede es que la influencia ha ido aumentando.
So what do we mean by conversation? Conversation is a special kind of face-to-face interaction.
Entonces, ¿qué es lo que se entiende por conversación? La conversación es una especie, un tipo especial de interacción cara a cara.
Here we are in face-to-face interaction, but this is not conversation.
Aquí estamos en una interacción de cara a cara, pero no estamos conversando.
Because the right to the floor for the next hour.
Porque tengo de alguna manera el derecho de hablar durante la próxima hora.
And you're limited in your participation. Of course, you can. I will see your participation in your faces and in your bodies.
Lo que quiero decir es que ustedes están limitados en su participación. Yo no voy a ver ustedes en cara de sus cuerpos.
But it would be very strange if you just started talking.
Pero sería muy raro que ustedes empezaran a hablar.
Ironically, you're taking turns.
Irónicamente, hay una nueva turno.
This is a very special kind of programmed turn taking.
Este es un estilo muy especial de toma de turnos programados.
And that's the difference from conversation, because turn taking in conversation is not programmed.
Y esa es la diferencia con la conversación, porque la toma de turno en la conversación no está programada.
The current speaker is not limited to how long he can speak.
En la conversación, la persona ya no tiene límites sobre el tiempo que va a hablar.
And unless he chooses someone to speak next, we don't know who's going to speak next. That's an open question.
Y a menos que elija a alguien para que hable después de él, no se sabe quién va a hablar, quién va a ser el siguiente a hablar, y es una pregunta directa.
Of course, when it's a dyad, when there are 2 people speaking, it's expected that the other person will be the next speaker.
Por supuesto que cuando hay una aliada, cuando hay 2 personas hablando, se espera que la otra persona sea la próxima a hablar.
But when that speaker starts speaking, it's overwhelmingly true in conversation that the next speaker begins speaking very close to the end point of the current speaker's speech.
Pero cuando esa otra persona empieza a hablar, es casi siempre el caso de que esa otra persona habla muy cerca del momento en que la persona que está hablando está terminando su intervención.
That means that there is very little, relatively, overlap of 2 people speaking, and there is very little gap between the end of the current speaker's speech and the beginning of the next speaker's speech.
Eso significa que hay muy poca sobreposición, overlap, entre las personas que están hablando, y hay una cantidad más o menos baja de brechas, gaps, en la conversación.
So the big question is, how does this happen?
De manera que la pregunta es, ¿por qué sucede?
Well, there's been a tremendous, as I said, verbal bias in conversation analysis.
Había siempre un sesgo muy grande hacia lo verbal, hacia el lenguaje, en el análisis conversacional.
Because it was based mainly on audio recordings. Historically, that's true.
Porque históricamente un hecho que se basa fundamentalmente en grabaciones de audio.
And the first major hypothesis that was presented is that turns are constructed in such a way as to project their endpoint.
Y la primera gran hipótesis fue esa, que los turnos están también no seguido para proyectar
their endpoint.
proyectar el input.
Now, there's a lot to that. There's a whole hour discussion of all of the complexities of that, but I'm going to leave it at that for now.
Hay mucho más que decir, hay una hora completa que se puede hacer con estudio al respecto, pero lo voy a dejar ahí por ahora.
So basically, the lemma for conversation is one speaker at a time.
Básicamente, el lema para el análisis conversacional es un participante una hablante a la vez.
Now, this is, as you can see, this is the polar opposite from what Fred was talking about this morning.
Como pueden ver, por justamente puesto lo que estaba hablando.
Right. Now, that doesn't mean that there is not simultaneous talk.
Eso no significa que no haya habla simultánea.
There is simultaneous talk.
Hay habla simultánea.
But there are certain kinds of simultaneous talk which are okay.
Pero hay ciertos tipos de habla simultánea que están bien.
They're non-problematic or obligatory in some cases.
Y que no representan problemas o son obligatorios en algunos casos.
And there are other manifestations of simultaneous talk which are treated as problematic by the conversationalists, the interactants.
Y hay otros tipos de habla simultánea que son considerados como problemáticos por la gente que estudia el área.
Obligatory simultaneous talk is like what Fred was talking about this morning.
Algunos casos de habla simultánea obligatoria son lo que estaba hablando Fred en la mañana.
And some simultaneous talk which is expected but not sanctioned is something like terminal overlap.
Y algunas de las cosas que la habla simultánea que son esperadas pero no consideradas complejas son los terminal overlaps.
Terminal overlap is when the next speaker slightly overlaps with the current speaker. Before the current speaker finally ends, the next speaker is already speaking.
Y eso es cuando la persona que va a tomar el siguiente turno de habla empieza a hablar un poquito antes de que esté terminando la persona que está hablando en ese momento específico.
That's not considered a problem because it's self-liquidating.
Esto no es un problema porque se parece por sí mismo.
Because the current speaker is stopping. And so there will be then one speaker speaking at a time.
Porque el hablante actual está terminando de hablar, se está deteniendo, entonces se espera haga silencio y le otro.
Another example of simultaneous talk is when the conversation splits in two. That's called schisming.
Otro ejemplo de habla simultánea es cuando la conversación se divide en dos, esto se llama esquismo, que es escisión.
That can happen when there are at least 4 people talking in one conversation, and that splits off into 2 separate conversations for a while, and then it may rejoin.
Eso sucede cuando hay al menos 4 personas hablando y se separan en 2 conversaciones entre 2 personas y luego vuelven a juntarse después.
Another very common example of simultaneous talk are what are called continuers, where one person is talking and the other person is saying, right, true.
En otro caso, lo que se llama continuador es que cuando una persona está hablando, el otro dice, ajá, ok, bien.
Another example is collaborative talk, where I may be saying a sentence and I have trouble finding a word, and you come in and you fill in the word.
Otro ejemplo de habla colaborativa, como por ejemplo cuando alguien se le olvida una palabra y el interlocutor se la ayuda a completar.
But what's considered overlap here for our purposes is the problematic simultaneous talk.
Lo que vamos a considerar como sobreposición overlap para el propósito de esta charla es la simultánea.
And that's talk which the speakers themselves feel like they have to manage to eliminate.
Y ese es el habla que los participantes mismos encuentran que tienen que de alguna manera eliminar.
Okay, what about gaps? Gaps are empty spaces between the end of one turn and the beginning of the next.
Las brechas o gaps son espacios pasivos, espacios de silencio entre intervenciones.
But they're different from pauses.
Pero son diferentes las pausas.
Pauses can happen in the middle of a turn.
Las pausas pueden suceder en medio del turno de hablar.
And it's different from a lapse,
Y es diferente de lapsos,
which is just, when we run out of things to say for a while and just are waiting for somebody to think something else.
que cuando nos quedamos sin idea o estar que hablar durante un rato y estamos esperando que suceda alguna cosa en la interacción.
So in the normal ongoing activity of conversation, there's one person speaking and then another person speaking and another person speaking, and the gaps between these turns is typically, on average, 200 milliseconds.
En una conversación normal, hay una persona hablando, después otra persona hablando, y otra persona hablando, y la brecha, la gaps en esas conversaciones típicamente tienen una duración de 200 milisegundos.
Okay, so what about the body? That's only considered, all of that literature only considers the verbal production, verbal performance.
Lo que hemos visto hasta ahora es solamente considera lo verbal.
Because bodies are always present, they're always co-present, and they're always in motion.
Porque los cuerpos están siempre presentes, están siempre co-presentes y están siempre en movimiento.
So let's start looking at sign language. Question early on in sign language was whether there wasn't a modality effect in turn taking in sign language.
Veamos qué pasa con el lenguaje de señas. Una primera pregunta en esta área fue saber si había un efecto de modalidad en la toma de turnos.
That means that the idea was that, well, of course, people wait for one person to stop before they start talking because the voice production will interfere with the comprehension. Two people talking at once is more difficult to understand than each person talking in their turn.
Una de las razones porque al ser auditivo, al ser verbal la interacción, auditivo, entonces dos personas que hablan al mismo tiempo van a generar algo que es más difícil de entender que si se turnan para hablar.
So the idea naively was that, well, I can see and sign at the same time, so I could be signing and you could be signing. We could be doing this communication like that without interfering with each other.
La idea ingenua en esto de que dos personas se estaban haciendo al mismo tiempo de manera tal de que se podían hacer cosas al mismo a la vez sin que esto interfiriera en la interacción.
So that was one possibility, and that's been proved not to hold. Turn takers or conversationalists in sign language also take turns, and they also precisely time their turn beginnings.
Eso fue una de las ideas, pero se vio que esto no es así y que las personas que investigan el lenguaje de señas de toma de turno han visto que efectivamente hay también toma de turno en el lenguaje de señas.
So here's the setup of the conversation. This is a conversation between two deaf people. They're friends. They've known each other for some years, and but they were put into this laboratory and told to talk. They hadn't seen each other for a while.
Entonces, por ejemplo, que hay dos personas que son sordas y que son amigos y se los ponen en laboratorio y se les dice que no se han visto en un rato y se les pide que conversen.
So they didn't have any established topic to talk about or any established time to talk. Well, like 20 minutes conversation.
De manera tal de que no había ningún tema en particular que hubiera que tratar y no había límite de tiempo, a pesar de que era más o menos 20 minutos lo que duraba.
So as often happens in a conversation, there are little narratives that come up.
De manera que como ocurre en muchas conversaciones, surge una narración.
So I'm going to show you parts of these narratives in the software that we use to transcribe and study these things. So this is no longer presentational software. This is the software where we actually do the transcription.
Vamos a mostrar algo del corpus de los videos y lo vamos a mostrar en el software que se hizo estudio, quizá analizar lo que dice la interacción.
I'm going to focus in the analysis that I'm going to share with you on just the end of Wilson's talk, his turn. He has quite a long turn because it's a story that he's telling. It's a narrative. And first I'm going to show you everything he says up until the part where there is the turn transition.
Okay, vamos a mostrar la intervención más larga de Wilson. ¿Sí? Wilson continuamente que cuenta la historia para enfocarse en un momento en la parte donde está cerca de la muerte.
And I'm showing this to you in real rate of speech.
Y se lo va a mostrar en la velocidad verdadera de habla.
Right, I'm not speeding it up or slowing it down.
No
Just to give you the feel.
Y bajar la velocidad para que no hagamos idea de cómo es.
Now you will see Reggiani, you will see her reacting with her face, but only Wilson is talking.
Van a ver la reacción o algo así, reaccionar con su cara, pero solamente habla Wilson.
Okay. Okay, he's told a story there about himself in school. He said he was in physics class and the professor gave him a task to do in class.
Va a contar la historia cuando él estaba en el colegio, en la clase de física, y el profesor le dio una tarea.
And there were these terms in physics.
Y había unos términos en física.
And he was supposed to explain them.
Y se suponía que él tenía que explicarlo.
And these were all these complicated terms. He holds his hand out here, his left hand, as if it were a paper with these terms written on it. And he says these concepts or words, and he says the whole list of them.
Entonces él hace la misma como que tuviera una hoja de papel donde están todos estos conceptos muy complicados, estos términos, y empieza a explicarlos.
Then he says he requests his friend to help him, a woman who's sitting beside him, and she sat down beside him on his right side. So he's graphically showing where he sat.
Entonces dice que le pidió a una mujer que estaba cerca suya que la ayudara y ese se todo junto a su derecha, como lo va a mostrar.
So she explained each term to him.
Y ella le explica cada uno de los conceptos a él.
And then he said, okay, I understand.
Y él dice, ok, entendido.
And then he complains that it was a lot for him because it was 6 terms.
Y luego se queja que era mucho para él porque eran 6 términos.
And his friend, also deaf, only got 2.
Y su amiga, que también es sorda, solo recibió 2.
So here he was with his friend, with the woman sitting beside him, studying the 6 terms.
De manera que él estaba ahí, con la mujer sentada a su lado, estudiando 6 términos.
And over here was his friend who only had 2.
Y al otro lado estaba su amiga, que solamente tenía 2.
Okay, so this is a complaint. He's complaining.
Es una queja.
It's unfair.
No era justo.
So now in the part where we have the turn transition,
Yeah.
didn't see the what video?
Video? Did you show one?
Oh, I'll show it again.
Ah,
No usó arte.
we saw nothing.
Huh?
We
Usó
didn't
arte.
saw it.
Oh, you didn't see it move at all?
No.
Well,
We saw you.
well, I'm sorry, I wasn't counting on this at all. Huh? No, it's not, that's not the problem.
It is, yes, yes. Button, right, use the green button.
It doesn't even move, I think. Huh? Well, you want it bigger? Smaller?
It'll choose the right size if you use the green button.
No, that, okay, but still, it's not moving. Oh, wait, okay, there it is. Oh, no, okay, but that's,
Si alguien sabe cómo hacerlo, me ayuda. You have to put it in a small size. That's good. Can
okay,
you see?
oh, well, now I have to find that, where it is.
No, it's going.
It's, explain to me what you did. Did you do?
We're seeing that.
Oh, that's the one. But I don't know where it is here.
Here. This on the side. If
Might
you
be
go
something
side
on
on
the
the
screen.
screen,
Okay, but,
you enter the.
hmm?
If you go by this side to the right,
How do I do that?
like good.
Mhm.
Just then you want to take it out.
Here, is this it? Okay, well, that unfortunately has gone way beyond my example. Oh, it's still going.
Sí, por favor. Si alguien sabe cómo ayudar, por favor.
Déjame sí. Quiere que aparezca todo en una pantalla.
Yo creo que, claro, que parezca como.
¿Dónde está
Alexander, we don't
configuración?
display mirroring, so he sees the same things.
What? The,
Necesito que aparezca
¿Dónde está
la
la
rueda.
ruedita?
Configuración. Ahí está. ¿Sí?
So now you should see the same thing here and there. Okay.
is I can't control this window where it shows.
Now you can.
Here is the same.
Yeah, now it does.
On the other ones. Okay, so. I'm sorry. Sorry, I can't do it.
You can do it?
I'm totally lost because nothing is showing up there that's happening here. And I don't know where these other things are that you set up for me here, like that. It's not moving here, it's moving here. And the other one. Okay, guys, I think I'll just have to. I'm just going to have to show you here on the PowerPoint, because that you can see. And I think I'll have to walk up there and point. Well, maybe I can, yeah, okay, I can put.
Okay, now I can
Point. Yeah, I'll just put it here with the thing. Because what I wanted to show you was I can drag this vertical line across. This vertical line here corresponds to the time in which these pictures are, what they're representing is right there at that moment.
Okay. Esa línea, puede ser desplazar esa línea que representa un momento específico del tiempo de los videos.
So if I drag that line across, you can see the movement in slow motion, or frame by frame, what's happening at each point along the way.
Entonces, si mueve esa línea, se puede ver el movimiento lento o cuadro a cuadro lo que está sucediendo en el video.
So you can see this screen here shows a period where only Wilson is talking. Those are the cues at the bottom. And then Reggiani starts to talk.
Entonces, lo que se puede ver ahí es lo que está abajo, son lo que corresponde a adelante. Se puede estar hablando solo Wilson, por eso se ve solamente su capa, y va a mostrar lo que ocurre donde está sobre el cuerpo.
So if we take this point here, this is the beginning point of Reggiani's movement.
Si tomamos este punto, que es el momento donde empieza el movimiento de Reggiani,
That is her manual.
es su movimiento manual.
And what she does at this point, from here to here, from here all the way across to here,
Y lo que hace en el momento entre ese punto, el primer marco y el segundo, es
she has her hand in her lap, her right hand. She moves her right hand up to here.
tiene su mano en su pierna y la mueve hasta su seno.
This is, we don't know at that moment whether she's talking or not.
No sabemos hasta ese momento si ella está hablando o no.
But we realize that she's not talking when she does this.
Pero nos damos cuenta que no está hablando cuando ella se arregla el cabello.
This in gesture studies is called an adjustment, a self-adjustment.
En los estudios gestuales se le llama un ajuste, un autoajuste.
Right. And this represents for us that gestures, even when they're not linguistic,
Y eso representa para nosotros que los gestos, incluso cuando no son lingüísticos,
are structured.
están estructurados.
They have an internal structure.
Tienen una estructura interna.
This internal structure has been extensively studied.
Esta estructura interna ha sido estudiada de manera intensa.
Now I'm going to go back here to talk a little bit, show you a little bit about the structure of manual gestures.
Entonces voy a hablar un poco de la estructura de los lenguajes normales, o sea, de los gestos normales.
This was proposed mainly by Kendon originally.
Esto fue propuesto fundamentalmente por Kendon, de primer lugar.
And he shows that there is when people aren't gesturing, their hands are in a rest position.
Y muestra que cuando las personas no están gesticulando, tienen las manos en posición de descanso.
When they begin to gesture, they move their hand to a certain position,
Cuando empiezan a hacer gestos, mueven la mano hacia una cierta posición.
and that's what he calls a preparation.
Y eso es lo que él llama una preparación.
Then the gesture itself
Luego está el gesto en sí.
is called a stroke. That's the
Y ese
energetic part of the gesture.
gesto se le llama stroke o golpe y es la parte energética del gesto.
A gesture can also be made like this.
Un gesto también se puede hacer de esa manera.
It's just a hold
Y es simplemente hold o mantener en suspenso, en pausa.
without motion, but it has to be held like this in order to be the gesture.
No hay movimiento, pero tiene que ser mantenido en ese suspenso para que sea un gesto.
This is a salute, but it's not a salute. None of this is a salute until it gets to the right place.
Esto es un saludo, pero ninguna parte del movimiento es saludo hasta que no llega a la parte adecuada y se mantiene.
and then it can go back to wherever, or it can go off to do another gesture.
Y luego baja o puede convertirse en otro gesto, lo que sea.
Here's an example where you have somebody preparing,
Aquí hay un ejemplo donde hay alguien preparando
and then there's a hold at the beginning,
y hay un suspenso al comienzo
and then there's the stroke,
y luego está el stroke o golpe
and another hold at the end.
y otro suspenso o puede decir al final.
Now, independently of that study done in gesture studies,
Independientemente de eso, estudios
signs, lexical signs in sign language have been described in essentially the same way.
los signos léxicos en el lenguaje de señas han sido escritos de la misma manera.
Here is the sign Chicago in American Sign Language.
Este es el signo para Chicago en el signo de lenguaje americano.
So you see it has a preparation
Tiene una preparación,
and then two motions.
luego dos movimientos.
At the beginning of the first motion is a hold,
Al comienzo del primer movimiento hay un
another hold
suspenso,
here,
otro suspenso ahí,
and then another stroke,
y luego otro golpe,
and then a return.
y luego una devolución.
So here you have four things happening at once. The first line is hand position.
De manera que hay cuatro cosas sucediendo al mismo tiempo. La primera parte es la posición de la mano,
Hand configuration.
la configuración de la mano.
Yeah. So you see the hand configuration, the way it was at the beginning, it gradually changes until it gets to the place.
Entonces se puede ver que la configuración de la mano es distinta como estaba al comienzo y gradualmente cambia hasta llegar.
So that's why it says they're changing.
Por eso que eso se le llama cambio o por estar en cambio.
All through the number one there, the hand configuration doesn't change.
Hasta del número uno en adelante, la configuración de la mano no cambia.
The second row there is place.
La segunda fila ahí es el lugar.
So again, the hand is changing place up until one point, then stops,
Y entonces no, la mano cambia hasta llegar a un momento, luego se detiene,
then changes again,
luego cambia de
stops,
nuevo,
and stops
y se
again,
detiene,
then changes again.
y luego cambia.
The third is facing, that is the hand orientation.
Y luego está la cara, que es sobre la orientación de la mano.
And the fourth is non-manual configuration, and that's facial expression.
Y la cuarta es la configuración no manual, que es básicamente lo que corresponde a la cara.
So the sign is from here, from this first place where all of these align, to the last place where they all align.
De manera que el signo va desde el primer punto en que los cuatro elementos están alineados hasta el último donde los cuatro elementos están alineados.
So that's equivalent to what we were saying about gesture. There's a preparation phase in which these various articulators are changing.
De manera que este equivalente a lo que estábamos hablando de los gestos, hay una fase de preparación donde hay cambio
Until they all align.
hasta que se alinean.
Then they can change again and align, change until the final alignment, and then the sign is over.
Y luego hay un cambio y alineación, hasta que hay un cambio, y eso ocurre que hay un cambio final y luego una final donde hay una reflexión.
So in order to understand what's happening in the sign language conversation, we had to code for the phases of the signs as well as just the sign itself.
De manera que si queremos entender este flow, tenemos que codificar las fases del gestos, además del tipo de gestos.
This is what they're saying at that transition point. Wilson is saying, okay,
Esto lo están diciendo en el momento de transición del video.
Wilson was saying 6 for me was a lot.
Wilson está diciendo que para mí sería calidad
For him, only 2.
y para él solo 2.
He had it easy.
Y le resultó fácil.
And then she, Hijiani, after she scratches her head,
Y luego ya después que se rasca la cabeza,
then she shrugs.
Ahí
Shrugs.
se me coge los hombros, me
Yeah.
coge los hombros.
So I can't show you the shrug because of all the technical problems, but she's doing three things at once, actually. She's raising her left hand,
Hace tres cosas al mismo tiempo. Levanta su mano
she
izquierda,
raises her shoulder,
levanta
left
su
shoulder,
hombro
and she tilts her head.
y gira su cabeza hacia un lado, gira su cabeza.
Now, Alan knows all about this because he has an article on this gesture,
Alan sabe todo sobre esto porque tiene un
this
artículo sobre
head
esto.
tilt shrug.
Excuse me, ¿qué?
Head tilt
Cabeza inclinada y encogimiento.
that's accompanied with a shrug and a palm up open hand.
Y la palma hacia arriba sobre la mano abierta.
Now, this is not a lexical sign.
Esto no es un signo léxico.
This is a gesture that you find, I presume, all over the world.
Este es un gesto que supongo que se puede encontrar en todo el mundo.
So, she's not speaking in the sense of speaking sign language.
De manera que ella no está hablando en el sentido de que está hablando en lenguaje de señas.
But she is starting to say something that is, we can actually interpret what she said, whereas we can't interpret this. We can't translate this into any language.
Pero está empezando a decir algo en nosotros podemos entender como algo que va a decir o dijo, pero que se puede interpretar distinto a lo que está haciendo antes cuando se acaba de tomar que.
But differently from lexical verbal language, this gesture doesn't have any specific, definite translation.
Pero a diferencia de lo que ocurre en otras cosas, este gesto no tiene ninguna traducción específica.
What it tends to mean in general is that, well, there's some epistemic question.
De la manera que se lo entiende esto en general es que hay alguna clase de pregunta epistémica.
Right. So it's more of a marker of stance.
Y es más que nada un marcador desde el punto de vista.
And it shows that she's not totally satisfied with his complaint.
Y muestra que ella no está completamente satisfecha con la queja de Wilson.
So in the case of this particular shrug, if we take the shrug as speech,
En el caso de este encogimiento de hombro particular, si nosotros tomamos este encogimiento de hombro particular como habla,
then we would have to say that we have overlap.
podemos decir que existe overlap, sobreposición.
Because at the same time, Wilson is saying lexically,
Wilson está diciendo léxicamente,
focal. He's late. He's taking advantage of the situation and not working like he should.
porque está sacando la vuelta. Okay. Está sacando la vuelta
Yes. So he's actually saying, Wilson is actually signing that. And while he's signing that, Hegiani is gesturing somehow that, well, she's not convinced.
Mientras Wilson está haciendo ese señal, su interlocutora está como escéptica al respecto.
Now, in sign language, it would be easy to almost lexicalize the shrug.
En el lenguaje de señas sería fácil, casi lexicalizar el encogimiento de hombro.
But it's the same shrug as used in oral language. In oral language, that would never enter into conversation analysis, that shrug as being overlap.
Pero es el mismo gesto, la misma cosa que puede suceder en el lenguaje oral cotidiano, pero en el análisis conversacional jamás se incluiría eso como una manifestación de sobreposición.
But even if it is overlap, it's very little overlap.
Pero incluso si es sobreposición, es muy pequeño.
Because you see you see here, it's only like, it's only 100 milliseconds
Dura solamente 100 microsegundos.
until the end of his lexical sign.
Hasta el final de su signo léxico.
And all of the rest of this, for him, is his retraction.
Y todo lo demás es la parte de retracción.
Right. So if you discount the retraction as being non-speech,
De manera que si no se considera que la retracción es hablar,
then he has stopped speaking, and even if you count this as a shrug, it's a minimal overlap.
de manera incluso si se considera esto una sobreposición, es mínima en cuanto a la parte léxica.
Okay, now if we ignore the shrug and we say, okay, that's not language, so that doesn't count.
Si ignoramos el conocimiento donde decimos que eso no es lenguaje y no cuenta,
Then what we've got is a minimal gap.
lo que tenemos entonces es una brecha mínima.
And here you see we have only just a little over 150 milliseconds gap.
Una brecha de 150 milisegundos.
From the end of his slacker to the beginning of her first lexical sign.
Desde el final de su
His sign
de su signo hasta la extensión.
until the beginning of her first lexical sign. Her first lexical sign is it depends.
Que es rebelde.
Okay, so there you have an example of how if we look at where the signs are and eliminate what the preparation, which in sign language takes a certain amount of time, it's a lot more time than in spoken language.
De verdad, aquí tenemos un ejemplo que si examinamos los signos y eliminamos la parte de la preparación, que en el lenguaje se es mucho más importante y larga que lo vimos en los ejemplos,
We find over and over and over that turn transitions happen like this.
nos vamos a encontrar que una y otra vez las transiciones ocurren como estas.
Comentarios.
Thanks for these great examples, Leland. My one first impression is something that I often find in linguistic work, that the problem for the linguist is not the problem for the actual people who are speaking. And I wonder if this is the case with these examples, especially the sign language example, that they didn't seem to have a problem with their getting back and forth. They weren't worried about whether it was a turn or not. But for us researchers, these are worries. Is it a turn? Is it not? Is it language? Is it not? And I wonder what your thoughts are on that. Is this a problem? Is this just a researcher's problem of the categories, or is it a language user's problem?
No, from a conversation analyst's point of view, what we're looking for are the user's problems, the user's problems. We're trying to see what they consider to be problems. This was presented as a non-problem example. From the tradition of conversation analysis, we can demonstrate that we wouldn't expect this to be a problem example because of the way the interaction took place. So this is not an example of a problematic one. I didn't get into that at all. We have examples where the overlap is problematic, and then what we do is look for the members. That's the jargon for the interactions. How they're going about the strategies they use to resolve that problem. But it's the problems that they see because we notice that they change their certain behaviors, like they speed up or they repeat more or they get louder, until they reorganize back to the norm. And these do happen often. That's a good question. Yeah,
I didn't understand in part that you were talking about, the structure of the gesture, because it is the structure of the gesture in sign language or in general. We have structured gestures. For example, if I'm now speaking out loud, and I am doing things with my hands, with my voice, probably with my feet, even. And those are structured gestures, or they have a lot of variability, or some of them are structured, or some of them
okay.
are expressive.
I don't mean to, by structure, I don't mean that it's a particular form. I mean that the gesture can be analyzed internally. There are different parts. There's the preparation part, and then you are going like this. So before you talk, now your hands are in your lap. So there was a time when you raised your hands. That has a different status from the moments when you're using your hands this way. And then you put them back in your lap. So you ask people, what is the gesture? They'll say this. They won't say this. So people are sensitive to these different phases. They're called phases, gesture phases.
And the other,
Oh, and the other part of the question is it different in sign language? No, I tried to show that basically it can be analyzed.
but all these things that I do with my hands right now, lexical, are they like meaningful in the sense of I do know what you're expressing when you do this or you do this. Like when you show the woman like this, you interpret it like with meaning, like kind of a standard meaning.
Okay, well, really, that's a key question. That's a key question, and that's basically what gesture studies trying to figure out. Gestures mean. There are some gestures like this that have definite meaning. These are called. There's a special category called emblems because they're basically lexicalized. But there are others like this that are very recurrent. They show up very often, but they don't have any particular meaning. It depends on the situation. Like this is a very common gesture, but this is going to be an offer. It can be part of a shrug. It can be representing some kind of concept if I'm comparing two concepts. So they don't have any. They're not like lexical items that you could translate, because how you interpret them depend on the moment. Now the other question of what about this? Is that meaningful? You can't say, because it could be. And in fact, we've been looking at this video for 10 years. We keep finding new things about it. It could be that a gesture like this, it's the beginning of her movement, her bodily movement. That, hey, she's mobilizing her body now to talk. And if that is read that way by her interlocutor, then he may have some disfluency in his speech preemptively to a close or something like that, because he can tell from her this movement that she's getting ready for something, right? Even before she actually says anything. So basically, the way what we feel about signs is that anything can be a sign, anything can be symbolic, or rather a sign, if it's interpreted as meaning. If I interpret this in some way, then that is a sign that I have interpreted.
I just had a comment on the Rose and Harrison conversation. Could you go back to the transcript?
Yeah.
But yeah, so I also just thought it was interesting that they're also doing different things in the interaction. And so she's talking about her feelings, that she's worried, and he's problem solving. He's talking about, is she going to understand or is she not going to understand? So there's also, I think, a difference in goals that they have in the interaction, so that then she might take his facial expression as, oh, he's not, ratifying my feelings in the situation that I'm worried. He's not getting it that I'm worried. He's supposed to empathize with me that I'm worried, But and he's seeing it as, oh, she's unreasonably,
But he's trying to solve her problem on a different level from where she feels her problem is, it seems. Now, we have evidence for that. Right. And what's the evidence? Part of the evidence is that she repeats herself in almost exactly the same words, with prosody, with an emphatic prosody. She said, I am worried.
But you also see how this could then be used in an applied way, in a therapeutic setting, couples therapy, or it's like, what are they doing? And then they keep saying they have disagreements and they don't understand each other. And then you can apply some of this analysis and see how they have different goals in a situation. And they're talking about the same thing, but they're coming at it from different goals.
Well, actually, that's a very insightful comment, because historically, one of the origins of gesture studies, at least in the United States, was psychiatry.
Kendon.
Huh?
Adam Kendon.
Oh, Adam Kendon and Condon was a psychologist, but I'm thinking of Bateson and some work that was done. Some of the very first multimodal transcriptions were done by a group of which Bateson was part, and it's called nowadays it's called The Natural History of an Interview. They took a psychiatric interview, and in which Bateson participated, and transcribed it, tried to transcribe everything, but they had no technology like we had today. But they tried to transcribe all of the different movements, of all of the different articulators, of all of the different participants, plus voice changes and the prosody and the language up to the phonetic level. So this was never published because it was just unwieldy. But that was one of the beginnings of looking at nonverbal communication. And the motivation was exactly that psychiatrists realized that something was going on that wasn't being captured in the language that was being used. That they could sense things from the clients that was ineffable to them. So they were trying to find out whether that could be codified in some.
I think the story is that Bateson was showing on first around in California. There was a family therapy session going on, and he had a one-way mirror, and he left the room. First, it turned off the sound. It was the body language, and that's when he realized that you have to treat this as a system rather than
That's right.
individuals.
Yeah.
Without the sound, it was more informative than with the sound.
Right. And so we're still trying to figure out how to do this and how to integrate all of these, because all of these things are potential signs, and they're all being potentially picked up and all being potentially interpreted. And as I say, the body is always present. It's always there. It's always in motion because it's alive. And we can tell this because if you're in a conversation and you all of a sudden become immobile, you come to a stop, halt, because your interlocutor is going to think something's wrong. And you could try it. You could try it out. Just all of a sudden stop giving continuers and just looking at it all. And see what happens. Then come back and tell us tomorrow. Any other questions? Okay.